Like and subscribe right now, or else this will be in your bed tonight. r/AskReddit by Reddit Universe. Funeral home employee owners of Reddit. What's the most ridiculous outfit you've seen someone buried in? Shortly before my nan passed away, she emailed me a picture of her new sandals she bought. She got 2 pairs in 2 different colors, so the picture was her with one of each on. It was only fitting that we dressed her in those. She'd laugh if she knew. My great aunt wanted to be buried in her bathrobe. Her stepchildren honored it. To be fair though, she wanted her clothes to be donated to a homeless shelter she volunteered at and her jewelry to go to her kids. She wanted to be buried in her comfy bathrobe since it would cover her and not take too much away from what others may need. Most of the residents of the homeless shelter attended her funeral, more than half wearing an article of her former clothing. My grandma wanted to be buried in powder blue PJs because she wanted to be comfortable. So that's exactly what we did and she looked great. My great aunt was buried in her 100 jazzercise classes taken t-shirt. She was super freaking proud of it, so it was fitting. Love that woman. My great grandmother worked as a clown. Like she attended a clown college and everything. She loved her job very much. She was buried dressed as a clown, with the makeup and everything. In my grandpa's case, the outfit was his birthday suit and a treasured blanket. When my grandpa died a few years ago, it was his wish that he be buried naked and wrapped in his favorite blanket, a blanket that my grandma handmade for him decades ago. Thankfully the funeral home was very understanding of his wishes and had him in the casket naked with the blanket around him for his viewing and subsequent burial. We put a bottle of Imodium in my dad's pocket just in case he got the shits in the afterlife. Funeral director thought we were bonkers. My grandmother had a deck of cards for 60+ years. They were frayed, stained, and you could barely read them. She refused to use any of the nice fancy new cards we gave her and never shared the story as to why they were so important to her. She was buried with those cards. It seemed like such a tender and intimate moment to place them next to her, as if they were a huge token of her memories that were never meant to be shared. It's been 20 years. I still miss her beyond words. My mum was a casual lady who excelled at dog rescue. When she passed, it didn't make sense to put her in a dress or suit. So, she was cremated in her favorite comfy jeans and a "You'll Never Walk Alone" dog rescue t-shirt. My husband's uncle was a very famous clown. Although he wasn't buried in his clown suit, clowns from across the tri-state area came in dressed to pay their respects. It was the strangest, but most beautiful thing I ever seen. There was probably over 100 clowns at his funeral. Not ridiculous so much as weird from the outside. My grandfather was buried with a folded up bunch of paper towels stuffed up his sleeve. He was one of those guys who always had something for spills and runny noses. And he always had paper towels or tissues with him. Turns out he had started keeping them in his sleeves when he was younger just in case he ever needed them. And with 5 kids and 11 grandkids, he always needed them. When he died, his sons decided it would be very fitting if he had some paper towels with him. So that's how he was during his viewing and service. Fancy nightdress and matching robe. This 70+-year-old lady, or maybe it was her husband's preference, wanted to be buried in this glamorous vintage nightdress set that you would see in an old movie. It had feather accents and matching kitten heel slipper things. She also was buried in her costume jewelry. Her regular hairdresser came in to do her hair and cried the entire time. I think she had been sick for a while, so the nightdress fit loosely, so we used double-sided tape and a few simple stitches to the nightdress to try to keep everything where it should go. It was a weird request, but I thought it was interesting. And, to the staff's surprise, her family seemed to expect this as something totally normal. Pretty cool. I buried my late husband in a Superman t-shirt and his favorite camo pants and boots. He wore his camas when he went to chemotherapy. He called them his battle pants. I put in a poker chip from one of his mates, his BlackBerry, and a toy from our daughter. I always wonder what the archaeologists would make of it if he was ever exhumed. Slightly off topic, but my grandpa passed away last week and we had his visitation. Funeral on Thursday, Friday. At the funeral home, the director asked when the last time he'd worn a suit was. We said it was probably for my grandma's funeral 6 months earlier. Apparently there were cookies in the pocket of the pants. Completely appropriate, given my grandpa was a child at heart who loved ice cream, cookies, and candy. We left the cookies in there. My mum was an avid bridge card game player. Our sweet funeral director researched a good winning hand in bridge. Mum was cremated holding her winning hand. My dad was a firefighter. He died of lung cancer when I was 21. We decided to cremate him in his formal uniform, but my mum came out in front of our house full of family and friends with his large collection of superhero boxes and said the Flash or the Hulk. It was a really great moment to lighten the mood and brought his goofier side right back to life. We chose the Flash, by the way. The Walking Dead shirt. Family had a great sense of humor. It's one of my requests to have my shoes tied together when I'm buried. If my corpse ends up coming back to zombie terrorize society, I want people to have every advantage against my reanimated remains. Not a funeral home worker, but when my dad died we sent his favorite Crocs for his feet. They were Ohio State University merch, and he often wore them to church to preach in. Yes, you read that right. My dad was a pastor who preached in Ohio State University Crocs. He also had a hideous shirt that my mum tucked into the casket with him. My mum had tried to get rid of it several times, but my dad had a sixth sense and always rescued it from the donation pile. She didn't bury him in it, because it didn't fit him anymore, but she let him take it with him. My grandmother. She was the kind of woman who wore shoulder pads and almost everything including t-shirts. My grandfather, a very practical and straightforward man, wanted to dress my grandmother in something she loved to wear all the time and always got tons of compliments on. I should also mention he is red-green colorblind. Bright colors do not stand out as much to him. It was a sleeveless button-up blouse that was covered in the good old stars and stripes. After some discussion with the rest of the family, we ended up choosing her second favorite outfit. A very tasteful silver dress, with shoulder pads of course. Side note. The casket was a lilac purple. That, Pawpaw would not budge on. My uncle was buried in a Santa Claus outfit and I can say I'm scorned forever for Christmas. All I could think about was a Santa zombie chasing people. I sang at a funeral where the man wanted to be buried with his brass stool from a local pub. He'd been a regular for years, and the pub acquiesced. It was weird to sing to a brass stool at the graveside portion of the funeral. As I remember, it had red leather inset on the seat. My grandmother was raised Seventh-day and believed in the resurrection. When my grandfather died, I laid out his best clothes and his dress cowboy boots, which he loved. My grandma hated those boots, so she said, "Oh no, they don't bury people with shoes on." So I acquiesced and grandpa went into the ground in his socks. I am sure she was worried she would have to spend eternity with him in those boots. My first husband was an avid fisherman. His parents insisted he be buried in a suit, but his favorite outfit was a pair of khaki shorts and a yellow base pro shirt. I asked the funeral director to put that outfit underneath the suit, and no one was the wiser. I put a couple of his favorite lures and his most well-loved pipe in his pocket. I don't doubt for a moment that the crematorium disposed of those items, but at least I knew I did right by him. My father was buried in his wetsuit. He loved to water ski and would go every weekend. I even had a matching one when I was a baby. I don't know if this counts, but it contains a wedding dress and basically someone's in it, so I'm just gonna say it. If it doesn't count, it's okay if it gets deleted. I have to delete it. When my great-grandmother died, her wish was to be buried with her husband who had been cremated about 14 years earlier. But it's illegal here to bury two people in one grave unless it's asked like years before they die. So my grandmother had this plan. She had a pillow made of G-grandmother's wedding dress. So my grandmother put G-grandfather's ashes into the pillow, and when we could say our last farewells, we asked the funeral man, I don't know what it's called in English, if we could change the original pillow for this one. He agreed and we were trying so hard not to laugh, because we were smuggling G-grandfather, who was dressed in a wedding dress, into the coffin illegally, and I swear I could hear G-grandmother laugh through the wind. But that's a story for another time. Her funeral was wild. One of my medieval LARP teammates lost his wife when they were both in their 50s. They were very passionate players. He buried her in a beautiful white dress decorated with pearls and rhinestone, a veil, a crown similar to King Elrond's. We could see her in the small chapel of the hospital. She was gorgeous. Her husband held a speech as he used to do during LARP sessions when we mourned a dead hero, and at a certain point we shouted her name 10 times. 50 of us. It was heartwarming and surreal. The funeral mass was on the next day. It was fine. Somehow, treating her as one of our characters helped him to accept her death. He still plays, and wears a medallion with her portrait during game sessions. An old lady spent 40 odd years in her local church choir. So the family asked the choir if they could have her choir robe to bury her in, as it meant more to her than any of her ordinary clothes. Not a funeral home employee, but an elderly friend of mine who was obsessed with space aliens demanded to be laid out in his Star Trek uniform. He looked good. Everyone understood and were cool with it. His widow was fiercely protective of him. He left me one of his 5 Star Trek communication devices. High quality, too. Not a funeral home, but I went to a family friend's funeral where the guy was just shirtless. He had a blanket covering up to his chest, so I'm not sure if he had pants. My father always used to tell me he wanted his dead body stuffed and placed in the lobby of an adult movie theater. As a kid I did not understand what was funny about this. And now he denies he ever said it. Warning, this is going to be graphic and kind of gross, but you're all gonna read it anyway, so let's do it. My husband's grandma died after a long battle with cancer and alcoholism. She had always been a small woman, but the 2 diseases wreaked havoc on her body and she had wasted away to a tiny waif of a person by the time she died. She also had a wickedly dirty sense of humor, which makes this story even better. Now, it should be noted that his family was grief-stricken, but utterly exhausted, as those of you who have ever lost a person to a prolonged illness can understand. The day of the funeral arrived, and we were gathered around her open coffin saying our goodbyes. A somber, nervous funeral director came over to the eldest daughter and whispered something in her ear. She started to giggle and called the other siblings over, who started laughing out loud. Apparently, Granny's skin was thinner than they thought. While dressing her for her last party, the backs of both of her arms ripped open in several places. In order to make her appear normal from the front, the morticians had used duct tape to put her back together again. I can't even tell you what she was wearing, but I'll never forget a bunch of my in-laws laughing over their duct taped grandma in a casket. It's so morbid, and she would have loved it. My grandpa was buried in bib overalls and a plaid shirt. He was just a simple farmer and that's how he wanted to be seen for the last time. My husband's grandma had a box that she wanted opened after her death. It had a few instructions in it about what she wanted for her funeral. It also included a handkerchief that read "Bury me with this in my hand or I'll haunt you." My mother-in-law made sure that was in her hand and able to be read by everyone at the viewing. It really did capture her sense of humor. My grandma was horribly embarrassed by the fact that she had dentures. We made absolutely sure that they were firmly in place when she was buried. My dad told the funeral director that if she was buried without her teeth, she would haunt us all. A friend of mine worked in the funeral business. She said a woman died and her husband and family were at odds. They felt like he killed her, but they had no proof of it. Anyway, he had them dress her in a tiny sundress and asked for her breast implants, because quote, "I paid for them so they're mine." She said it was creepy and she felt so bad for the woman's family. My grandfather always wore those donkey jumpsuits. When he passed, all the grandkids wanted to bury him in his favorite one, light blue, but my grandmother quickly put a stop to that. My dad went with a Mars bar and birthday cards. He died in a palliative care unit and someone in the family bought a Mars bar for a snack, but forgot about it. After dad died, we were given a bag with his stuff in it. We emptied the bag, but filled it up again with clothes we wanted him buried in, and gave the bag to the undertaker. We went to see him a few days later, which was his birthday, and there he was with the Mars bar in his hands. It had been at the bottom of the bag and the undertaker thought there was a sentimental reason for the Mars bar. We thought it was very funny and we just let my dad go with his last ever chocolate bar. My uncle was cremated in a shirt with a bunch of flames on it. It wasn't planned though. When my parents died, my sister and I had to choose the clothes. Mom's was a simple dress she wore to church. My dad always wore cowboy boots. We chose his blue suit, but couldn't find his black boots. We sent the brown ones, but I was beyond bothered about it. Found the black ones before the first viewing and had them changed out. My father would never have worn brown boots with his navy blue suit. I used to work in a morgue when I was an undergrad to help pay for tuition. One of my tasks was to dress the dead and place them in a casket. When I arrived to work, I located Miss Jane Doe, a 95-year-old lady, from our cooler and placed her on a silver table. I then proceeded to find her outfit that family has left us for Jane Doe to wear. As I take the clothes out of the bag, I quickly realized it's not the usual apparel for a woman in her 90s. It was a glittery black dress that came down mid-thigh, exposing cleavage, with spaghetti straps and a pair of red high heels. They also provided a thin scarf to go around her shoulders. I thought to myself, she is definitely dancing up in heaven now. Unfortunately, due to skin tear, we had to advise the family to use a less revealing attire. Clown suit, I kid you not. He's wearing a teddy, but a masculine teddy. Kind of a different story, but my grandpa passed away and my aunt had recently lost a bet to him for $20. She wrote it as a check and put it in his pocket before they closed the casket. When my grandmother passed away, I put a skein of yarn and her knitting needles with her. When her husband, my grandpa, died, I put his favorite whiskey and a shot glass in his pocket. When my dad died, I put peach pits in his hands. He told me when I was little to make sure I did it so that he could grow into a peach tree and feed us. I never forgot. I kept my promise. He also called me Peaches. Funeral director here. I have two personal favorites. 1. A man who was dressed in a wizard's cloak. When I met with his wife and his mom, they kept describing him as mystics and magical, and I didn't quite understand why until the family gave me his clothes and explained that he was a wizard. Everyone that came to visiting was also wearing cloaks. 2. A woman who was dressed in a sequined ball gown, floor-length mink coat and a mink headband. She also has sequined high heels on. Can't forget to mention she was 86 and had multiple self-portraits around the room of herself. We also had a horse-drawn hearse bring her to church and the cemetery. I've had some different outfits, but in the funeral profession I could never class anything as ridiculous, as everyone is individual and it's so special to me how different people define themselves. However, here are some of the outfits that stuck with me as I found them so personal and touching. I've had one where the woman went in a full Christmas outfit in the middle of June. One where the man was wearing the dirtiest, smelliest dog-haired suit, but were implicitly told to leave it, as it was him, which was just so lovely. An 83-year-old trans woman who never came out publicly, but her best friend who was arranging the funeral brought her in her best dress, killer heels and wig, even though no one at the funeral would have had a clue. I also gave her glam makeup and false eyelashes. If there is a heaven, she strutted in there like an absolute queen. A Jedi. These little things are why I love my job so much. I am not a funeral home employee, but me and my mom's had a good laugh. It was still really sad when my great-grandpa was buried in his clown suit, because he requested that he'd be buried in it or hate everyone while watching from heaven. Not me, but my sister worked in a funeral home. Little boy died at his birthday party, was buried in his Spider-Man PJs. My grandpa insisted we bury my grandma in a tracksuit, because she loved the color and never got a chance to wear it. I'm sure she arrived in heaven, looked down at herself, looked around at everyone in their Sunday best, and said, "You have got to be shitting me." My cousin was wearing a Star Wars t-shirt, his basketball shorts and a pair of footy boots. He passed away of a rare cancer in his early 40s, only a few months after his mum. Seeing my uncle that day was one of the saddest things I ever saw. But after hearing what he was wearing underneath that coffin, all the sadness and tension in the room broke, and everyone erupted in laughter, and that's exactly what he would have wanted. I am not a funeral director. A friend of mine passed away in college due to a drug overdose. She was like super into tabletop gaming, Doctor Who, and anime. Her friends and family decided that the best way to honor her would be a cosplay funeral. So, she was dressed in this steampunk Victorian dress that she had before she passed. Only about 1/3 of the people dressed in cosplay. I'll admit I took the lazy route by dressing up as David Tennant's Doctor Who, the current Doctor, because the costume was literally a blue suit which I already owned. It was really nice to see all the DMs line up and put her character sheet into her coffin with her. I made sure to give her a complete set of dice, too. My former manager's grandson passed away from cancer when he was 6. He was an avid fan of Batman. They buried him a child-sized replica of Batman's costume. When my husband passed away, I put a joint and a lighter in his pocket. Strangely, he passed away on 4/20/16. He loved the ganja. My late fiance wore his favorite shirt with a picture of a pug on it that said "Pugs not drugs." Joe's Crab Shack. Peace, love and crabs. No shit. I guess this is something I can contribute to. When my oldest son died, I practically begged the funeral director to bury him with big boy underwear on. He was 6 and because of his condition, was never able to wear underwear, only diapers. I don't know why, but I just felt like when he got wherever he was going, he could finally be a big boy. We put him in some comfy pajamas, which is what he wore most of the time since he was immobile. My 4-year-old and I went to build a bear and he made him a Batman bear with a cowboy getup and with the voice button said, "I love you, Connor. I really love you." He placed that in his little coffin. We also placed a couple letters L, one from his mother and I. I also wrote one from his 4-year-old brother who I guess didn't fully understand other than he knew Connor wasn't coming back. Still breaks my goddamn heart. I still wonder to this day when we visit him if that bear's battery still works. It'll be 6 years this the 7th of October. Welp. Now I'm crying while I rock my 2-year-old to sleep. It never gets any easier. My brother was buried in Osu, Oklahoma State. Woody his favorite pair of jeans wearing a pair of Oakleys I had he really liked. Well, this was more of a little casket decoration thing. So when my great uncle died, we all put a stuffed animal in the casket with him that had red on it and my family put a peacock in there. We also put a pair of red suspenders in there with him. Not a funeral home owner, but used to work in a bridal store. One day a group of women came in and said they wanted to buy a wedding dress to bury their dead grandma in because she had never had a wedding. A little odd. But okay. Off we went, helping them find a pretty vintage dress. A week later, they bring back the dress and say it didn't work out. Due to the buyer's remorse law in the state, we had to take it back and refund them. When we got it out of the plastic, the dress reeked of formaldehyde. Yes, that's right. They put grandma in that dress for her viewing, then took her out of it and returned it. We were horrified. My grandma decluttered some of my grandpa's clothes one time. In the box to get donated was this green velvet suit that he had held onto from the 60s or 70s. When he saw that she wanted to donate it, he got all upset, saying that he still liked it and wanted to keep it. She said, "Well, you can keep it, but if you do, I'm going to put that suit on you when I bury you." He ended up letting her donate it. I kinda wish he had kept it though, because it sounds like it was an awesome suit. Not a pro, but my mill wanted her dead birdies in his World War II uniform. For most people, that wouldn't be a bad thing, but he always avoided talking about the war. As I understand it, he had proposed to his sweetheart as he went off to basic training, and the hero status of it really appealed to her. They found out toward the end of his training that he had developed terrible hemorrhoids and they had to kick him out. He was so ashamed that he traveled to tell his fiancée late at night so nobody would see him. When she broke off the engagement, he headed back out and didn't speak to his family again except his mother until the war was over. They had no idea he hadn't shipped out and thought he was dead. So trying to get him buried in the uniform he hidden shamefully in a box in his mother's attic so nobody knew his awful secret was a little heartless. My father died in a tragic traffic accident, literally days before retiring. He was cremated after many organ donations, greater than 30 bits and pieces. And the funeral home called mum and said he needs clothes. Why? He's being cremated. State law. Fine. Mum went to the closet and got an outfit made up of his rattiest fishing clothes. The stuff she would throw out and he would pick back out of the trash. And he was cremated in that. We all figured it was pretty amazing. He went up in his most comfy outfit. All those pool slobs buried in monkey suits, and here is dad, just kicking back with a fishing pole enjoying the heck out of his afterlife. Ex-Mormon here. Mormons are buried in their temple clothes, so some funeral directors are a little surprised to see white pants, white shirt, and green apron. When my father-in-law passed, he was buried in jeans, t-shirt a flannel shirt, his boots and a ball cap with a fish hook on the bill. There were fishing lures, a fishing pole, and I'm pretty sure a .357 was buried with him. Not a worker, but my uncle was in the closet trans and was done up full drag queen. It was amazing. One more frick you to her awful family. Has not happened yet, and knock on wood it doesn't happen anytime soon, but my mother has a very specific outfit she wants. My mother, who is a creature of comfort, has decided that she wants to be buried in the clothes that she wears most of the day. Those happen to be a set of flannel pajamas that must have pockets and comfy slippers. To take this one step further, one day I walked into the living room where my mother was lying on the couch with her hands crossed on her chest. She looked up at me and said, "This is how you will see me when you bury me." 18-year-old me was not prepared for this. There was once this guy that was buried in just a pair of underpants on which there was written "We Americans Never Die" and a pair of those sunglasses that looked like the American flag. A grown-ass man wearing an apron. And just an apron. Didn't look like anything religious either. 2. We always cut the clothes to put them on the bodies. This one guy wanted to wear his Texas arm belt, so we cut it. Like any belt. The family ended up giving us hell because they wanted their entire family to be buried in that belt. 3. There was this one very large older lady, and she was going to be buried in a tube top and booty shorts. 4. A kid who died a tragic death. The parents wanted something a bit more revealing, like lowish cut tank top dress, little bit above the knee, etc. While she had major open wounds and bruising all down their body. We asked them to change the outfit, but didn't want to, thinking we have some magic healing touch, but I bet the family regretted that decision during open casket. My uncle was a longtime Civil War reenactor and historian. He was cremated in his Confederate cavalry uniform and the remains buried with the uniform's hat and canteen. I remember a funeral in Glasgow in the 90s where they buried an old Palestinian gentleman in a number 8 Rangers t-shirt. Turned out he had asked to be buried in the Gaza Strip. I want to be buried in full Templar armor. My high school friend's grandma was buried in Arkansas Razorback sweats. Woo pig sowie. Not a funeral homeowner or employee, or even dead yet, but I was telling my wife recently I want to leave a letter to be opened at my cremation, politely informing people I've been eating corn kernels for years and I'm going out with a pop. When my mum died, my trashy ass sister showed up dressed like Beetlejuice. Black and white striped suit made of flannel with a white turtleneck under it. She is very large chested and couldn't button the jacket. I swear that suit was really pajamas. Every time she got near me, I whispered Beetlejuice under my breath 3x. Asshole move? Sure, I'll own that, but she's so insufferable I refuse to feel bad. She literally had the director place a throne-like chair in the middle of the first row so she could sit on it while the rest of us peasants got folding chairs. One of my best friends was buried in his high school football jersey. It was his dad's idea. The thing is that we were already 4 years out of high school, we weren't a good football team, and he wasn't a remarkable player. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more videos every day.